In the quiet suburbs of Utah, a chilling crime unfolded, one that would leave investigators, families, and entire communities desperate for answers. This wasn't the type of crime that came with an easy explanation or a story that could be neatly wrapped in a headline. No, this was something far darker, far more unsettling. At the center of it all was Tyler Robinson, a young man who, on the surface, seemed ordinary. But behind that facade was a mind carrying secrets no one could have predicted. When the details of his confession finally emerged, they did more than just shock those who heard them. They unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. How could someone so young, so unassuming, carry such hatred and act on it with such finality? This is not just the story of a murder. It is the story of obsession. It is the story of quiet resentment, festering in the shadows until it became something deadly. It is about the lies we tell others, the lies we tell ourselves, and the dangerous undercurrents of hate that, when left unchecked, can erupt into violence. In the next hour, we'll pull apart the evidence, retrace the final days, and walk through the mind of a man whose choices left a community forever changed. Before we dive deeper into this case, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. That way you'll never miss the chilling stories, shocking confessions, and hidden truths we uncover here every week. Tyler Robinson was not a stranger to those in his community. On the surface, he blended in, a polite young man, quiet in demeanor, the kind of neighbor who would nod in passing, but rarely stop to talk. Yet, beneath that exterior was a life marked by detachment. Friends described him as distant, someone who found more comfort in the glow of a computer screen than in face-to-face conversations. His world was increasingly defined by online interactions, chat rooms, and digital spaces, where his words carried weight in ways they never seemed to in person. But Robinson's isolation wasn't the only part of the story. At the center of this case was a victim whose life intersected with his in ways that would prove tragic. The two knew each other, not strangers, not casual acquaintances, but individuals bound by a fraught relationship. What began as disagreements, small sparks of tension, gradually festered into something darker. Friends would later recall the hostility that brewed between them, accusations, resentment, and unspoken grudges that only grew with time. According to investigators, this wasn't a crime born out of a sudden burst of anger. It was the result of a growing storm, a storm fueled by personal animosity, by unresolved conflicts, and by the corrosive presence of hate that crept steadily into Robinson's thoughts. The relationship, once merely tense, crossed into open hostility, and prosecutors argue it was that hostility that laid the groundwork for a deadly outcome. On a night that began like any other, the ordinary gave way to the unthinkable. Tyler Robinson, according to investigators, was no longer just a young man battling isolation. He was a man who had crossed a dangerous threshold. He armed himself, deliberately, methodically. Every move suggested preparation, as if the crime was not a sudden act of rage, but something calculated. The victim never saw it coming. What started as tension between two people had escalated into an irreversible decision, one that would leave a family shattered and a community reeling. The confrontation turned violent, and in those moments, the hostility that had brewed for so long erupted into an act investigators would later describe as cold, intentional, and merciless. But what followed was perhaps even more haunting than the act itself. Robinson did not hide. He did not stumble over excuses. Instead, he confessed, openly, even casually. In a tone that struck detectives as chillingly calm, he admitted to what he had done. There was no desperation in his words, no attempt to cloak the truth, only a stark acknowledgement, spoken with unsettling ease. This was not the remorseful confession of someone weighed down by guilt. It was the matter-of-fact admission of a man who, in his own words, claimed he had simply had enough. And it was in that moment that investigators began to realize this crime was not just about one act of violence. It was about the mindset that led to it. When authorities obtained the recordings of Tyler Robinson's words, the tone was what struck them first. He didn't sound panicked. He didn't sound regretful. Instead, his confession carried a chilling composure, as though he were describing something inevitable. In one exchange, Robinson was pressed by his roommate. Why? Why did you do it? His response was stark. I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out. The bluntness of those words rattled investigators. Here was a young man, not just admitting to a violent act, but framing it as though it were some twisted resolution to a conflict. Robinson even spoke about logistics, mentioning the rifle, speculating about avoiding evidence, and describing his movements as if he were replaying a strategy rather than recounting a crime. To seasoned detectives, this was more than a confession. It was a window into a disturbed state of mind, one where anger had calcified into justification, one where murder wasn't viewed as a crime, but as a solution. What disturbed many even further was how open Robinson seemed to be. He wasn't whispering in secrecy. He wasn't bargaining for leniency. He was simply talking, calmly, almost clinically, about what he had done. For prosecutors, these recordings were damning. For the public, they were haunting. Because in every word, in every pause, and in the eerie calm of Robinson's voice, the community was forced to confront a terrifying question. How could someone so young, so seemingly unremarkable, descend into this kind of darkness? Once the confession was secured, investigators faced a daunting task, proving not only what happened but why. Words alone, no matter how chilling, would never be enough. They needed evidence, and they needed it fast. Detectives turned first to Robinson's immediate surroundings. His roommate, a witness to his disturbing admissions, became a central figure in the case. Law enforcement treated him carefully, balancing cooperation with suspicion. Was he merely a bystander, or had he known more than he admitted? Forensic teams combed through the apartment, searching for weapons, digital devices, and any trace that could confirm or contradict Robinson's story. What they uncovered painted a troubling picture. The rifle, conversations on online forums, and Robinson's own digital footprint began to reveal a pattern. Investigators pieced together chat logs, computer history, and encrypted exchanges, showing a man who had retreated further and further into a world where hate and obsession festered unchecked. Meanwhile, prosecutors weighed their options. Should this remain a state murder trial, or did the scale of Robinson's online activity, and the potential involvement of others, warrant federal charges? Federal investigators were already circling, examining possible connections, tracking usernames, and mapping out whether Robinson had acted alone or was part of something bigger. Through it all, one fact stood out. Robinson's calm, matter-of-fact confession wasn't just a moment of weakness. It was consistent with the evidence around him, a life that had been spiraling toward violence long before that night. For the community, the pace of the investigation was agonizing. Every new detail, every update, revealed more about how ordinary life had concealed something deeply sinister. And as law enforcement dug deeper, it became clear this was no random act. This was the culmination of choices, grudges, and a chilling mindset that made tragedy almost inevitable. Why did Tyler Robinson commit such a crime? That question has haunted investigators, psychologists, and the public alike. The answer, as is often the case, is complex. Robinson was not the kind of man who erupted in a single moment of fury. Instead, his anger simmered, quietly building over time. Friends described him as withdrawn, consumed by the online worlds he inhabited. In those digital spaces, hostility often escalated unchecked, feeding into his own frustrations. Experts suggest that this isolation created a dangerous echo chamber, one where Robinson's thoughts of resentment were reinforced rather than challenged. But this wasn't only about loneliness. The victim represented something deeply personal to Robinson. Their tense relationship, marked by disagreements, insults, and growing animosity, became an obsession. Prosecutors argue that Robinson began to view his victim, not as a person, but as a symbol of everything he despised. That kind of dehumanization is what makes violence possible. Psychologists who examined the case noted another chilling detail: the tone of Robinson's confession. Calm, collected, detached. This suggested not just guilt, but a mindset that had already justified the crime in his own eyes. He didn't see himself as a killer consumed by rage. He saw himself as someone who had taken action, however twisted that reasoning might have been. In the end, Robinson's motives appeared to be a mixture of isolation, festering hatred, and a dangerous inability to process conflict in any healthy way. Together, those elements created a perfect storm, one that ended with a life taken, a family devastated, and a community left searching for answers. The case of Tyler Robinson is more than a story of one man's violent choices. It is a reminder of how hidden anger, left unchallenged, can grow into something catastrophic. It shows us the danger of isolation, of festering resentment, and of the dark paths people can walk when hate becomes their guide. For the victim's family, the loss can never be undone. For the community, the memory of this crime lingers as a painful lesson. And for the rest of us, it raises a haunting question. How many more lives could be at risk when warning signs are ignored? If you found this deep dive into the Robinson case compelling, make sure to like this video, share it with others who follow true crime, and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we uncover the stories that reveal the darkest corners of human behavior, stories that deserve to be told, and lessons that cannot be forgotten.